Just want to make sure there's nobody waiting outside in the waiting room.
Mm.
Oh, there. Okay, great. Hello, everybody. You're welcome to turn on your cameras if you want to say hello. But there's quite a big group of us today. So let's get started. Thank you very much. Hopefully you can see that. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. It's great to see everybody. So, like I said, you're welcome to turn your cameras on and we can say a little hello on this Friday, this lovely sunny Friday afternoon. As part of our trade compliance series of webinars, last week we actually hosted a session on Incoterms with Bonnie as well, which was a fantastic reminder about how powerful it is to get together in these kind of sessions and to share ideas and to learn the importance of networking together. So if anybody needs or would like a copy of the recording for that, pop your email address into the chat here and I'll go back to it later and send it to you. Today, however, we shift our focus from Incoterms of last week into trade compliance as a career and how we can accelerate our career and do our best to achieve what we want to achieve and achieve our potential. My name is Fiona Luciani. I'm the founder of the International Trade Institute, and I am delighted to be here today with Bonnie Kirsch, who is a trade compliance expert. If you don't follow her on LinkedIn, please do. She has her ear to the ground with all things trade compliance, particularly at the moment with IEEPA and tariffs and all of that. But she's also very, very passionate about helping others, mentoring, and getting the best out of those that she mentors and that she teaches. And Colm Halpin, who's based in Dublin, also a trade compliance expert, and he's here to share his journey, the do's and don'ts, with of course the benefit of hindsight, and what he would do and how he can help us as we progress through our careers in trade compliance. So we can see here at the International Trade Institute, of course, there is a huge importance on those traditional skills. Hopefully, you can all see that. Self-awareness, very important. Communication skills, from expressing ideas to actively listening. These are all really, really important. Decision making, emotional intelligence, if we're working with other people or if we're managing or working with a team, and vision setting. Creating clear goals that inspire us to get out of bed on a Monday morning and to start the week strong and to motivate you and to motivate the team around you. But what we are noticing is that these skills are evolving and agility is becoming so crucial for those working in trade compliance. We can see when we open up the newspaper every day or our phones when we get our news over the past 12 months or 24 months that everybody is now an expert in uh, tariffs and international trade agreements and sanctions, and we're reading about quotas and trade wars. And so it just really makes us realize that your role is so critical. Your role is crucial, and understanding how trade decisions impact the broader business is so important. And whether those trade decisions are being made within your company or whether they're external geopolitical decisions that are impacting your role. Confidence is so important as well, and building that confidence by learning essential skills and using then that confidence to help somebody else within your network or within your organization to influence decisions and to take on new responsibilities. Team integration, of course, building the relationships within your team and building trust is so crucial to accelerating our career. And data insights, what I mean by that is simply looking at the data that you have in your organization with whatever technology you have at hand and then using it to drive decisions and influence beyond your direct reports and influence maybe even other levels within your organization. And then networking and mentoring is so critical. I think we're all on the same page when it comes to networking in the true sense of the word can be so powerful. take a look around you, who's here today, share your LinkedIn profile in the chat and connect with like-minded people and help somebody else. And it could be today, it could be you helping somebody. Tomorrow, it could be them helping you and mentoring. Find somebody within your network that you know that you can trust and that will help you and have your best interests at heart. So on that note, I'm delighted to hand over to Colm, who is going to share his experience and his journey through your career in trade compliance. Colm is based in Dublin, like me, so thank you very much, Colm, for being with us today.
Great. Okay. Thanks a lot, Fiona. It's good to meet you all. It's my first time on one of these calls. So what I'd like to do, I'm now retired, so I have come through the whole trade compliance since the start, and I'm happily now not looking for any more business. So that's the start. Yeah. But what I plan to do is to maybe just take you through the different phases of my career and touch on a few little things to add a little bit of interest. We're going to have a little competition to see who can actually guess my age. Fiona will call out the winner at the end of the session if we have time. So briefly, in each of my careers, I'll talk about the role, I'll talk about the geography, because that did change from time to time. And then at each stage, there were different big issues. An issue then that Fiona has mentioned a couple of times there is the teaming, because teaming within the company and outside the company is hugely important. And then also for the different roles, so I have worked in the customs authorities, I've worked as a consultant, and I've worked in industry. And in each of those roles, you have different strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats. So I have about 20 minutes, but I'm going to try and get a lot in that 20 minutes. So going back to the beginning, I actually went straight into trade compliance when I left school at the age of 18. So no college degree, nothing at all. I went straight into the Irish Customs Authority as a higher officer of customs and excise, so covering excise warehouses, but also customs control officer and import-export controls. So it was actually quite a high, big responsibility job. It also meant that I had an awful lot of power. I could stop shipments coming. I could shut down somebody's supply chain. I could, if I disagreed with somebody's classification, irrespective of whether it was correct or not correct, the actual shipment would be stopped and detained until the company paid the deposit. So it was actually a very powerful role. And I had to cover, I guess one of the things to understand about the customs authorities is that they deal with every industry under the sky. So they're not dealing in medical devices or electrical components or something. They're dealing with the whole broad category, and they have to manage everything: classification, valuation, origin, across all those. So they will tend to know a certain amount, but they don't know everything about everything. And the way they're organized is I was on the operational side of customs, so actually at the ports, and then there's typically a headquarters where there is a specialist on valuation and classification. So my main roles there, and this really would have been the foundation for my whole career, in that I got to understand exactly what the customs authority is there for, and I got to understand what the law says and what the law doesn't say, and that really carried with me through the rest of my career, because typically if you're trying to solve a problem with customs, you need to understand exactly what the customs officials are trying to achieve. Towards the end of that 10 years that I spent in the Irish Customs Authority, I also then took on a computer science degree, because even though I don't think the personal computer had been invented at that stage, but obviously technology and computers were going to be more important. And in fact, my plan at that stage had been to actually move away from the customs and trade area. And Ireland was booming with all the technology companies, with all the names that are all forgotten by now. There were companies like Digital and Wang and Amdahl, and most people on this call will never have heard of those names. But Ireland has been really kind of central to a lot of the changes in the industries. And I know Fiona's very close to the IDA. The IDA has been bringing in the technology companies. We had disk drive manufacture. We had everything very early on. and then they moved on into the pharma space and into the other spaces. So it has been, although Ireland is only a small island in the middle of the ocean, it actually has been quite a core, and there's huge US investment here. There's also a lot of other Japanese companies had semiconductor plants and everything here. So that was really where my career started going. When I did an interview with Price Waterhouse to become a consultant, but not really intending to take the job. But they actually saw the technology industry and my combination of skills in technology and customs as being something. So, in fact, I think I was the first full-time customs consultant in Ireland. Um, Really, I didn't have any work coming into me, so I'm sitting in a room and I have to effectively go out, meet companies, and convince them that there's some value proposition for hiring a consultant. Because, as most people on the call will realize, consultants are expensive. Um, but actually, it was very easy in those days in Ireland because there was quite a lot of tariffs on semiconductors and computers. All of those had customs tariffs. And there were opportunities then to use trade agreements, to use inward processing regimes, and to use one of the things that we really developed from scratch was tariff suspensions, where if you can't source a particular component within the EU, you can go to Brussels, and the Irish Department of Enterprise and Employment will argue the case. There's a 12-month lead time, but they can actually grant an exemption then from all the customs duties. So that was something where there wasn't any knowledge of that in Ireland. I actually went over to Germany and learned from a counterpart in Price Waterhouse Germany who had been doing this about how the system of tariff suspension works, what the rules say, but also the practicalities, because the feature of that arrangement is that there's a lot of wheeling and dealing done at these Brussels meetings, where Ireland wants something and Germany might be opposing it, and the Irish delegate will agree to back off on something the Germans want. So it was the interaction of the operational side of that, as well as knowing the rules. But that was huge. But a lot of the issues then were either we were bringing opportunities to companies in Ireland that were effectively new to the customs space and had huge customs duty bills. And there was the introduction of technologies like personal computers were really new to the scene. And there were a lot of kind of genuine planning opportunities there where you could simply, instead of bringing in a laptop computer fully complete, you could take the microprocessor chip out, bring in the two separately, and under classification rules, they both had lower duty rates than the finished laptop. So it was quite an exciting. I would say from a career development and expertise, working as a consultant is actually a great space to be in. Now it has its challenges. I mean, the strength is the cumulative experience that you get with one client you can bring to another client. The challenging part is dealing with a huge charge out rate. So most companies can't afford something unless there's a payback. So you very often ended up working with a counterpart within the client to bring a value proposition up to management within the company in order to get a budget. Or in fact, at one point, I think a lot of my work was done on a contingency basis, where we said, look, absolutely no fee for this work at all, but we will take 15% of any savings that we realize at the end of the project. And I would say at one stage, more than 80% of my work was on the contingency basis. And it actually generated a huge income. The career development opportunities within the consulting field are also very attractive because you can progress from a consultant to manager, even to partner, and then into the international sphere. I would have always been under a bit of pressure to move to London or even to the US because that's where the bigger projects were. But I was able to do my initial consulting, which was 10 years with Price Waterhouse in Ireland, because we had such a good technology base here. Also dealing with, say, a lot of West Coast semiconductor companies of the USA and being able to get them tariff suspensions. There was also a lot of focus. At that time, there was a lot of trade disruption through anti-dumping duties. And I wrote an article in the Irish newspapers way back in a long time ago, about that, because again, the anti-dumping rules as they currently are actually tilted in favor of finding dumping. So they're not completely fair. And also we had Irish companies that ran foul of the rules unknowingly. A good example of that would have been where they were importing memory components from Taiwan, believing them to be Taiwan origin, but actually the silicon had come from Japan, and there were 60% and 90% anti-dumping duties on Japanese silicon. And the EU took the position that simply assembling from the silicon into the final chip didn't change the country of origin. And there was in fact, a couple of Irish companies that got assessed for potentially it was going to be tens of millions of euros in customs duties, anti-dumping duties. We were able to use the general customs rules like inward processing and equivalence to eliminate 60% of that liability, but it still meant something like 6 or 8 million in anti-dumping duties. But we were then able to bring that to the European Commission and convince the European Commission that the Taiwanese company was able to get its own anti-dumping margin at 0%. And eventually the companies paid no customs duties. That's a very good example of where a consultant can really do a job that an individual in a company or even a company on its own won't be able to do. So it's a great learning experience. I'm not trying to sell consulting, but if anybody has the opportunity to work in consulting, it is very good for your own career to get the experience. It also gives you the advantage you can specialize in certain areas. If you want to be the expert on tariff suspension or anti-dumping duties, there's always an opportunity within the big consulting firms to do that. Trade agreements and country of origin is another area where consulting companies can add a lot of value. After my time in Price Waterhouse, then I was approached actually by a headhunter to join Microsoft, the software company, as their internal EMEA trade manager. My initial reaction to that was there's no real big issues in software. It's 0% tariffs. I would be bored silly. But they actually convinced me to join in the end. I actually took a drop in salary, but they offered stock options and that kind of stuff. Now, I was the only trade manager in Microsoft for EMEA, but what I was able to do was to actually convince Microsoft that what they had hired me to do was not the best use of my resources. And I ended up refocusing. So this is where the geography then moved from being Ireland/EU to being the big issues for Microsoft are actually in the Middle East, because we had all the export controls and anti-boycott issues, as well as the fact that we were, those countries typically have customs duties on software, media, and there were massive big valuation issues. So Microsoft had its own specific issues, which enabled me to develop down that. It wasn't enough for me to know the general customs valuation. I had to know now, how do you apply customs valuation to volume licensing software products, where a kit of discs might go into a multinational in Egypt, and the royalty flows out of that could be 20 million over the next 5 years. So the question is, the Egyptian authorities were inclined to say, well, the value of the discs that went in is therefore 20 million. And I had to convince them that that wasn't the case. We also had issues then because Microsoft's business was 3 areas. We had the consumer products, which most people are familiar with, the software and the games and the consoles at the time. The volume licensing, which is where Microsoft licenses their products to the big companies. And then we also had developer products, because Microsoft supports software developers. And typically, if you're a software developer sitting in Egypt, you can sign up for $2,000 a year. Anybody can sign up, and you will get a monthly kit of discs. So the Egyptian customs were going through the box of discs and saying, well, there's Excel and there's Word, and they were totaling the value of the discs in the box, and they came to 15 or 18,000 for the box of discs, and they wanted to collect customs duties on it. But the purchase, actually, the developer had paid 2000, and that was for 12 kits over the year. So from a Microsoft perspective, the value of that should be about $150 per shipment. So it meant I had to go to Egypt, and with the local support from a local consultant, I think it was Arthur Anderson at the time, go in and sit down with Egypt Customs and actually convince them to apply the customs valuation rules properly. So we were educating the customs in Egypt, but also working with them to say, well, look, we can also make sure that these products are branded in such a way that they can't be diverted into commercial or into consumer or commercial channels. And it was very handy, very useful for me at the time also to, because so much of my issues were coming up in the Middle East region, I did learn some very basic Arabic, so I can actually speak very basic Arabic, and it's amazing what a difference that would make in the meetings with the customs authorities. So this is, and it's very rare. So going back to when I mentioned consultants, you will rarely get a consultant that can do that for your own company, because you will know your company's business, you'll know your company's products. If you're working in the pharma or the life sciences sector, you will know that the big issues there are clinical trials, issues like that. And you'll also know that, for example, on the classification of medical device, the EU takes quite a different view on classification to the US on about 15 or 20% of the products. So that's an area where you get to own and manage and set the priorities for your own business. One of the first things I did with Microsoft was that I met with the 3 general managers, and I did a risk matrix saying, here's all the possible things that could happen to each of your businesses here. And these are the consequences if they were to happen. And these are the probabilities that certain things will happen. And as your trade manager for EMEA, I am prioritizing these 3 issues for each of your businesses. And the other 20 issues on the list, I am going to completely ignore. Now, the benefit for me in my career was that prior to that, the typical trade manager would be at fault. Anything that came up in the whole supply chain, it was his fault and it was his job to get it fixed. I was giving them notice up front saying, here are the things that could happen. I am going to address what we agree together are the most important risks in that. So the volume licensing was a big risk. I would have said things like there's a possibility that the joysticks will be classified as games devices instead of computer peripherals and so on. And I got that buy-in by communicating in advance. So there were often things that came up that had been on my list, and I had agreed I was not going to pay any attention to them. So when they did come up, it wasn't my fault, because the business had bought into that. So that was, to me, a really creative way where you cannot get a consultant to know your business the way you will know that. After that, then I moved back into the consulting sphere. So I spent about 4 years in Microsoft, and then I went back into consulting with Ernst & Young, still based in Dublin, but over the following 18 years, we virtually had no Irish clients at all. And we built up a team from about 4 or 5 people initially to 20 people. We had some Brazilian people, some Argentinians. We had a very well-known Russian person on the team. But we were able to bring solutions to companies on their global trade footprint. So we would have done things like helping companies. Well, sometimes the problems came to us. So if a company had a big problem with the US Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, very often customs was identified as a weakness in their internal control and compliance program. And very often, in fact, foreign corrupt practices, non-compliances are tied in with the customs function because there's a lot of corruption in the customs sphere around that. So we would have been able to deploy teams across the world to the big players. So we were working with the big companies that ran into these problems with the FCPA or had these internal goals to drive compliance to a much higher level across the organization. And what would have happened in those companies, so if you took a big German company, they might have a very strong internal compliance team in Germany, but they didn't have people in each of the countries to do the training locally for each of their affiliates around the world. And in the FCPA project, for example, we had to do training in places like Nigeria and Angola, which again, a company could not do internally. And again, the consequence for the company of not getting the FCP sorted out and the monitors taken off were huge. So that was the last 18 years till about 7 years ago. Then I moved away from consulting because while the consulting is great and the career possibilities are pretty much endless because the amount of business that's out there, the companies need help is great. You have to sacrifice a lot of your personal availability. So you've got to be in Egypt when there's an issue in Egypt. You've got to effectively make sure that anything that comes up, you're going to be able to get the teams to work on that. So I just did my own personal decision 7 years ago to step away from it. And for the past 7 years, I have been just doing those jobs that are the ones that I want to do. So I still have an interest in IT and technology, and I would have used that all through my career, where initially we would have done things again in the global sphere. We would have done things to like create an actual model of the supply chain. In one case, we did it for a baby nutrition company where they wanted to know how they should configure their manufacturing plants to serve their destination markets and get best advantage of all the different trade agreements. And we were able to say, well, look, we've measured your current footprint, and you're getting about 52% of the possible trade agreement benefits that you can get. And we worked with them then to bring that up to 85 or 90%. There were certain things they couldn't do because China won't take anything from Taiwan, et cetera, et cetera. But we were able to take advantage and optimize their trade agreements. And that converted into 10 or 20 or 30 million worth of dollars worth of savings. And again, the people that sponsored the project with the companies got the credit and ended up getting the consultants to do all the work. But that was great. But it was, I also did at one point do a law degree because it is important to know the law. And again, throughout my career, I've had to take on the customs authorities, which will always go back to my original career in customs. I will always try and go to customs with a solution rather than a problem. And if customs come to me and say this company or the company comes to me and say they've been audited and they are under a serious threat from customs, I will say to them, look, or I would have said to them at that time, let's figure out how you can solve the problem for the customs authority and put a proposal to customs saying that, look, in 6 months' time, this is what's going to happen. The company is going to have the training, it's going to have everything in place to do that. So that was very much the approach and again, I will always, throughout all those different careers, consulting, Microsoft, just understanding how the customs authorities are working is really a key to that. So that's really a very quick overview of my career trajectory over that time. The key messages I would say before I hand it over to Bonnie is one is just knowing your own domain. So whether you're in the customs authority, you're in a consulting role, you're a lone trade manager within a company, or you're in a shipping and logistics company. It's just knowing what your strengths and weaknesses and your opportunities are, and then creating the internal and the external teams. So many of the issues through the years have been caused by companies not communicating internally. So somebody does a transfer pricing change and it causes massive issues around the customs field, as well as the fact that once you make a transfer pricing, if you change your value by more than 10%, that will typically set the alarm bells off in all the customs authority systems. So they will shut you down then. And then they will want to go back and redo everything for 4 years. So it really is the internal teaming across different functions. Some people bring that to a very high level where they get to sit on the councils and boards. But some people do it informally, just to say to the finance people, be aware when you do these things, it can have a customs consequence. And then thinking ahead, so not waiting for the problems to come to you. If you can actually say, here are the three most likely opportunities or the three most likely risks to the business, you can actually get ahead of that. And by doing that, you will also be advancing your career. So that's
Excellent.
very quick from my perspective, Fiona. I
Thank
hope that's been helpful.
thank you. Thank you so much, Colin. And I certainly have loads of questions for for you, but maybe I'll wait till the end. Thank you. Very insightful. And if you do have any questions for Colin, put them into the chat and we'll leave 10 minutes or so at the end. But so much insights. Thank you very much. Bonnie, I'll stop sharing screen because I know Bonnie has a presentation from her side. Thanks a million, Bonnie. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
Yeah, thanks, Colin. That was oh, there we go. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, okay, perfect. That was so great. Our career path has actually been very similar, although I never worked for customs. So I really appreciated hearing all of that from you. Very, very interesting. So first, I'd like to ask folks to tell me in the chat, what did you want to be when you grew up, when you were a child? So when you were a kid, this little guy obviously wanted to be an astronaut. He is so adorable. What did you want to be? And don't say that you wanted to be in global trade because come on, we know no 6-year-old is saying, Mommy, one day I want to be in global trade compliance. A pediatrician, admin assistant, or a waitress. Love that. A bus driver. That's so great. A farmer, a dentist. How did I end up here? I love that. A farmer, a doctor. Christy, I didn't know that about you. Hairdresser, genealogist. I wanted to be in global trade compliance and then not in parentheses. I love that. A singer, a teacher, a lawyer, an architect. Awesome. Well, lawyer's not too far off, right? I know we're not lawyers, but gosh, we're reading and interpreting laws all day, right? So very, very tangentially related. Amazing. I probably wanted to like be on Broadway or, something like that, although I can't sing that well and I certainly can't act that well, but we can all dream, right? So I will encourage you to not forget about those things that you wanted to be when you grew up, when you were a little kid. Think about those. I have always loved swimming my entire life. So obviously you can't be like a professional swimmer unless you're a really, really good Olympic athlete, right? But I still coach a swim team on the side during the summer for kids in my neighborhood, and I love it. It's so much fun. So don't forget those sort of goals that you wanted as a kid. These are my 3 reasons for working every day. These are my kiddos, although these pictures are probably a couple years old. This little guy's like 6 foot tall now. So, my career is in, so think about, I would encourage you to think about the why, right? Why do you get up every day and go to work? And it may be because I really love this nice apartment that I have and I like to furnish it well. And I like, to come home every day and read a book on my comfy couch. And that's my peace, right? It might be kids. It might be, I really want my pets to have the best dog bones that I can buy, right? It could be whatever you want. I want to retire one day like Colum has, we're all very jealous of you. Even though you're only 40, I don't know how you've done it. And then, we want to be like Colum and we want to golf all day or whatever the case may be, right? However, we choose to spend our free time. But think about the why, right? I think that's really important. My career, like I said, Colum, very similar to yours. I started in-house for a chemical company doing chemicals and pharmaceuticals. Then I went to consulting for a little while. I feel like everyone in consulting should kind of bounce back and forth between like consulting and then being in-house for somebody. So then I got recruited by Wayfair, if you're familiar with them. They're a very large e-commerce furniture company. So very similar to your Microsoft experience. I led their North American global trade compliance team for several years. And then I started my own consulting company. So, I think having a mixture of, whether you're in-house for a company or whether you take the brokerage route or like you did Colin work for customs, I think that's a really good to have kind of a mixture in your career if you're able to. It really lends itself to having different perspectives, which I think is really important. So I have another question for you in the chat. What do you value in a career? What do you value? So for me, this career can really, and Colin, you kind of mentioned this as well, it can really suck all of your time out of you, right? And sort of, it's very time consuming. And so it can be hard to have that like work-life integration, work-life balance. So I think is what's important to you. I have to have every weekend off. My weekends are free. I don't check emails. I don't, whatever the case may be. What's important to you? Tell me in the chat. Or maybe it's It's really important to me that when my child has a doctor's appointment, I can go and come back, and that's respected, right? Being helpful and needed, making a difference in the world, continuous learning, empowering people, continuous learning, work-life balance. For those of you saying continuous learning, you're in the right career, right? Because if you're not continuously learning in this career path, you're going to be left behind for sure. I see schedule flexibility. Those are all things that I think a career in global trade compliance can give you, but you have to sometimes work toward that, right? I see some people saying work-life balance. I think that you can definitely achieve that. Once you do, please let me know how you've done it. But it can be very, very difficult to kind of figure out as you're getting into your career, right? All right. So there's different career paths that you can take. You can be on the, and I actually left off actually working for customs on this. So we'll add that as a fourth one. But you could be on the customs brokerage side where you're the company responsible for actually getting the information from importers or exporters and transmitting that to the applicable government agencies, right? So you could take that route in your career in global trade compliance. You could be in-house trade compliance, like I worked for Wayfair, Column worked for Microsoft. You could work in-house for an importer, for an exporter, or you could take the consulting path. Now, that's not to say that you can't do all of these in one career, right? You certainly can. It is a little bit harder for folks to move from the customs brokerage side into any of these others. That's not saying it's impossible, but I do find that amongst people I've worked with, that is sort of the hardest switch because you're kind of looking at it from a completely different angle. So again, not to say it can't be done. It certainly can. Oh, and trade attorney as well is on there. I think that there's some education and some certifications that are good if you're looking at career growth. So whether or not you need a university degree, a college degree, I think kind of depends on the stage of your career and also potentially where you're located. I think in the US, there are certainly some jobs that you don't need a college degree, but it will get your foot in the door faster if you have one. There are also some companies who won't even hire anyone without a college degree. So it just kind of depends, right? It certainly is helpful, but I don't want to say that you have to have one, in order to succeed. And then certifications and licenses. I'll speak from a US perspective for a moment, but then I want to ask Colum as well, if you'll tell me from the Irish perspective. I think in the US, especially with a customs ruling that was released this week, we see that the importance of being a licensed customs broker is more important now than ever. But no one expects you to be an entry-level person with a broker's license, right? You should certainly work for 2, 3, 4, 5 years before you even sit for the test, because otherwise it will be very, very difficult to pass. You won't have the background knowledge that you'll need. So I don't think to get your foot in the door, you need that. But I think in order to advance your career, that's certainly something you should continue, to work toward. And that may be different certifications over time. Like I, started with one, then I got my broker's license. Then I continued to add on other certifications. I got Incoterms certified, for example. That's something that's helpful around the world, right? I already had the import piece covered with my broker's license and my CCS, if you're familiar with that, the Certified Customs Specialist. And then I was like, well, I need to prove that I can do exports as well. So I added on the Certified Export Specialist, right? So try to make it kind of well-rounded. Don't put all of your eggs in one basket, so to speak. And Colin was kind of speaking to that earlier when he said, you might be able to specialize in certain things, like the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act he was referencing, or, different things. That's great, but that may only take you so far in your career. You should specialize in a few things, right? Typically. So, Colin, what are your thoughts? Sorry to put you on the spot here. If from the Irish perspective, do you think you need a university degree or certifications or licenses?
So a couple of things there, Bonnie. Ireland is unusual in that, as far as I know, we still don't have any broker licensing requirements.
Yeah.
Anybody can do it, and there's no, which is really a downside. And on the other side of that is that I know Fiona has been close to the EU had a kind of a competency program, which originally started in Dublin, funny enough. So they had the Dublin strategy that led to that, which is actually really, it goes up to college level, university level competencies there. But again, I don't know that it's really rolled out too much here in Ireland. Um, but it's difficult to so education is a real challenge in Ireland, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that, and Fiona, I know you offer a lot of really great courses at the International Trade Institute, and that kind of leads me into the continuing education piece, right? I think that people can take, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but my perspective is that people who want to get their foot in the door, taking one of your courses would be great for them to sort of learn a little bit more, maybe even sound more polished on interviews. But then as they're already like in their entry level or maybe a couple steps above that, career, that coming to you for even more education is going to only help them continue their career. Would you agree with that?
I think it's so important for both of those things. One is the entry level, so just to kind of get to grips with what you're about to jump into, and then when you've been doing it for a couple of years, to take something a little bit a deeper dive, like a diploma level. And to Colm's point, there is the EU Customs Competency Framework, which is a curriculum that outlines the important topics and the important competencies that we sort of expect to see
Yeah.
at a certain level with those that are working in trade compliance after a few years and after you have some
Sure.
experience under your belt. Yeah.
Actually, one thing that's well worth mentioning as well is that an awful lot of the skill sets of trade compliance are global. So if you know classification and valuation, you could do this in Australia.
Yep,
You could do it in
absolutely.
South Africa. You could do it
Yeah,
in Canada. It's a
transferable
very
skills.
mobile qualification. The bit that's
Hmm.
difficult is that dealing with the Irish Customs Authority is a whole different issue to dealing with the Italians or the Egyptians.
Hmm.
And that's really where on the ground experience and knowledge comes into play because, okay, the rules and the law says one thing, but how it's applied in practice can be a very different thing. But getting for somebody to progress their career, they need to somehow be touching off people that have that experience and knowledge.
Yeah.
Whether it's through
Yeah.
the formal training, but also then just Bonnie, I'm sure you have so many issues that you could talk forever on that would educate, beyond what it says in the rules.
Absolutely, absolutely. And actually, I think that's a good, if I'm remembering right, that's a good segue for my next slide column. So thank you.
We
It's
didn't
like
set
I
this up.
planted you. Yeah, you didn't even know. So yeah, this one's about mentorships and networking, which is sort of what you're referring to a little bit, right? Not only being on the ground, but making relationships,
Mm.
building relationships with those key people, right? Like you mentioned going to Egypt earlier and sitting down with the customs officials, and in some cases, maybe even training them on,
Mhm.
valuation or whatever is needed, right? So mentorships are also fantastic. I have some folks that I mentor. I also have some folks that I reach out to, for mentorship myself. I'll say, hey, have you ever seen this issue before? Like, how did you handle it? Did that work out well? Or, certainly having those people and having those people in your life who you can call and say, hey, I got this job offer. I'm just not sure if it's the right move. Like Colin, you mentioned when you went to Microsoft, you took a little bit of a pay cut, but you got stock options. So I'm sure that you had someone in your life who you ran that by and you said, hey, like, I feel like this is a good thing, but is it really? Like, give me a gut check here, I think having those people who are maybe a little more seasoned in their career than you are, just to have those conversations with, or is that's an excellent thing. You might be asking, where do I find those people? Well, a lot of you have thrown your LinkedIn profiles in the chat. Connect with these people. Like Fiona said earlier, that's what we're all here. We all clearly have a common interest because we're in the
Yeah.
same webinar, right? So connect with folks on LinkedIn. I know not everyone has the chance to attend a conference, whether that's one in your area, whatever you're able to go to. There are lots of global trade conferences out there. That is a really good place to meet and network with a lot of people who are in the same career path as you and at different levels in their career, whether you're looking to mentor someone or whether you're looking for a mentor yourself. So, and networking, I cannot stress how many of us who our next job was set to us because of, someone we knew, right? And this industry overall, people working in global trade around the world is relatively small. So you just never know who your next, boss or coworker or whatever is going to be. So definitely I can't stress networking. going to go through some of this pretty quickly because I don't want to take up too much time and I want to leave time for questions. But make sure you're also building your brand internally, whatever job you're in right now. Make sure that you're seen as the go-to expert, right? But if you don't know the answer to something, say, I don't know, but I'm going to find out, right? And then you go find out and you come back with the answer. No one expects you to know absolutely everything, right? But you should be able to find out. How do you find out? You can research, or you can go to one of those mentors or that network that you've built, right? And ask. Collaborate cross-functionally. So if you're in-house for a company leading their global trade compliance, you should know the folks in purchasing, in sales, the C-suite if you can, right? But like customer service, you should know everybody, especially if you're like, working with product development, a technology team. Like you really need to be in touch with everyone, and collaborating cross-functionally. Externally, if you can get speaking engagements like the one I'm doing right now, or like different ones at conferences, they can be whatever you'd like. Those are always good. Write articles. If you're like, I getting in front of people and speaking sounds like I would rather have my toenails pulled off one by one, right? If that sounds absolutely torturous to you, don't do it. That's fine. Write an article, right? Post it on LinkedIn, and have a LinkedIn presence. I post on LinkedIn all the time, but only if I have something to say. Right? Don't just post just to post. I post if there's something important that I've seen in the news that I want to share with other people. A lot of times I want to get opinions like, hey, I saw that this court case was filed today. This is really interesting for global trade. How do you guys think it's going to go? Right? Because I don't have a crystal ball. So I have a LinkedIn presence. That's a really good way to kind of build your brand and have people see you as, maybe an expert in the field, or at least a go-to person who has their finger on the pulse of what's going on. If you can do consulting or side projects to broaden your experience, consulting is fantastic because I get to do different things throughout my day. So in an 8 to 10 hour day, I might be doing a little bit of valuation first sale work. I might be doing some FCPA work. I might be doing some classification or writing a binding ruling request or helping someone with IEPA tariff refunds all in one day. And that's really, really cool. You don't always get that experience, to kind of have your hands in all kinds of different things throughout a single day when you're in-house for somebody. So consulting is a really good way to kind of expand your experience. All right, I'm going to skip through some of this because I don't want to take too much time here. I think some essential skills for success, some soft skills. If you need to work on, you're like, I would really like to speak in front of people, but I'm not quite there yet. I'm super nervous. I'm not sure what to do. Take an improv class, right? Go to a public speaking class. Do some acting, some community theater. That I cannot tell you how much that will help you. Technical knowledge is always really important. That's something Fiona can help you with at International Trade Institute, right? Business skills, risk management, team building skills, these are all essential skills for success. So real quickly, think strategically, build and lead a strong team. Communicate your value. Let me go back to that one. I do want to touch on this one. You have to communicate your value. So I know that we usually have all of us typically have like a yearly performance review, right? Don't come to that yearly performance review unprepared and just say, well, I've done a lot of good work this year. That's great, but what have you done, right? As your manager, I want to see the value that you've brought to the team. If you're making XYZ amount per year, I want to know that your worth is justified. So justify it to me, right? So throughout the year, I want you to start today, keep a document of everything you're doing, just a running document. I issued 10 free trade agreements for a certain free trade agreement. And if I had not done that, we would have paid XYZ amount in duty. Right? Write that down. Keep track of what you're doing throughout the year so that when your performance review comes around, you have a running list of all of these things that you're accomplished and you're not trying to think back 12 months ago to what you did, right? That's very, very hard. Lastly, take care of yourself. It's really, really important. This job now more than ever is very strenuous, right? It's very stressful. There's so much going on in the world. If you're not taking care of yourself, taking care of your career is going to struggle as well, right? So do these things, set realistic goals, whether it's for your personal life or your professional life, prioritize your time and your tasks. Reach out for support when you need it. Most people in global trade are very type A. It is okay to ask for help. Okay. So I'm going to say that again. It's okay to ask for help. Work on yourself, whatever that means. Utilize your breaks. I know in the US, people are very, very bad at taking their vacation time. Please take your vacation time and exercising regularly, even if that's just 10 minutes, right? Whatever it is, get up and stretch throughout the day, do whatever you need to do.
Yeah.
All right, off my soapbox. Thank you so much. I will stop and let Fiona take over.
Amazing. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant, Bonnie. We don't want you to stop. That's the thing. It's just we're running
No,
out of
it's
time.
okay.
So I was just having a quick look at some questions in the comments, and if you do have any, we're here for the next sort of 5 or 10 minutes or so. Um, I have some questions. Gosh, where do I start without taking up all of the time? Colin, just quickly back to your matrix solution with Microsoft. Did you have any trouble getting buy-in from senior manager to agree on those priorities?
No, because what I was doing to them was saying, okay, for your business, here are the 20 issues. I'm putting these as numbers one, two, and three. Do you want to change the order? They obviously wanted me to do all 20 of them. I said, look, I'm one person, so I can't be everywhere doing everything all the time.
Yeah,
So that is a
of
very
course.
important point, and I think Bonnie may have mentioned that as well, as to communicate there. As well as, again, another point I picked up on there is that very often you should be looking at how much customs duty you are managing. So if you're saving 10 million through trade agreements and 2 million through inward processing, you're actually managing a huge big budget. And the fact is that customs is very severe, that if there's a non-compliance, you will be subject, that crystallizes a duty liability. And the customs authority can go back between 3 years and 5 years. So it's a bit like driving a car without getting an annual service. A kind of a rule of thumb I have always kind of had is that companies that are getting big savings, whether it's trade agreements or regimes, they should be investing 15% in compliance and trade management. And they should be, so from a people on the call here, find a company that will value what you can do and what you can add. And also that idea of, if you go to conferences, you will get to see the companies, some of them are on the call here, that actually pay more attention to trade compliance. I know in the life science sector, we used to get them, all the big life science companies together, and they would share their own information about what they were experiencing with clinical trial valuation openly. Another industry like auto won't do that sharing. But if you got a very junior level in one of those big life sciences companies, they have teams that will provide the stepping stones for you to progress your career. And in fact, they are looking for people that want to develop their own capability and take on more responsibility. So I think it's good. So one
Thanks.
thing we didn't mention, Fiona, I think it is worth mentioning here, is technology. And the whole thing about the AI, as well as there's an awful lot people in trade compliance can do using robotics and automation. Things that used to be done manually, and you'd send out reminders for long-term suppliers declarations. You can actually say, look, we can streamline that by using the technology that's there. You are also, if you're in a trade compliance role, you are the subject matter expert for trade compliance. So if
Yeah.
anybody is doing any big project, you need to be on that team as the subject matter expert. And again, a very important point that Bonnie mentioned is that if it's beyond your depth, say we need to bring in a Colm or a Bonnie or somebody to sit into this session so that we get this right, because if we get it wrong, it will backfire.
Thanks, Colin. And Bonnie, do you have any final words on tackling the issue of visibility within a company? So, like influencing senior management if you're not in a senior management position, like because if you're doing a trade compliance role, say if you're knee deep in classification, you know that inside out.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think, Fiona, don't we have, and I know you didn't set this up like this, but don't
I
we have a
know
webinar coming up about this topic, I think.
we,
But yeah, it's So I think it's continuing with that cross collaboration that I talked about, right? And not only that, it's again positioning yourself as a thought leader. And also when you go to senior management and you say, "Hey, we have a problem," don't just go to them and say, "We have a problem." Say, "We have a problem, and here are, I think, the three solutions to that problem. And let me tell you what the risk is for those solutions. Let me tell you the cost for those solutions." Right? So don't just say, "Oh gosh, we found something that's under anti-dumping, but we don't know what to do about it. And we think we it should have been under anti-dumping for a long time and we haven't been paying it." Say, "This is the amount that we owe. Here's what we should do." Be more clear, with the path forward. And so bring a solution and not just a problem. I think that's a really good way to start.
Thank you, Bonnie. And also thanks for the reminder. I'm just putting a link to next week's webinar. Columns, there's a couple of questions in the chat about how do you get into consultancy. You've made it very appealing for everybody here. Bonnie is a consultant, so maybe she has some thoughts to shed on that.
Certainly, it's just there are consulting firms out there that will advertise. I know myself from interviewing people. I get people that have fantastic CVs, but when I drill down, there's no substance there. And I've had people coming in that are very reserved about their own experience and so on. But I can see the potential in them, and I would hire that person anytime rather than an AI generated CV is actually not going to do anybody any favor a lot of the time.
Yeah.
It's actually knowing the fundamentals of some of the training that you're going to do and so on. And you will find places, you can be opportunistic, you'll find places to, and you will become so valuable that companies won't want to let you go. They'll want to
Yeah,
progress
and
your
I,
career.
I think that's great. I think when people come to me and they say, "Well, I want to work with you, I want to do consulting work," my first question is, "Well, what are your areas of expertise? What do you bring to my team that maybe is a gap today that I'm looking to fill? Are you very good at, USMCA, CUSMA validation, right? And making sure that someone qualifies for a certain free trade agreement, or are you really good at, valuation, transfer pricing studies, that sort of thing?" So, become an expert. You need to know everything, but become a really good expert on a few things that you can say, "If you need me for this, I'm your person." I think that's also important.
But also be reassured that there are some issues to which nobody knows the answer. So if you,
Yeah, for
a
sure.
very few, like things like clinical trial evaluation, there is not an answer to that.
Very difficult.
And it's again, people that are dealing with it are trying to cope with it, but there's
Yeah.
not a magic bullet anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you so much both for your insights. We've got one more minute. Yvonne, thanks for your question about does anybody have any recruitment firms in Ireland or Europe dedicated to trade compliance? So if anybody does have anybody that they work closely with, maybe share that with Yvonne. Incoterm certification. Yes, Bonnie, you mentioned that. Chase is
Yeah,
asking.
that's from the International
Yeah.
Chamber of Commerce,
Yeah.
Chase, if you're interested in looking into that. That's where that came from.
Great. Reciprocal tariff challenged our trade compliance. Yes, reciprocal tariffs challenged our trade compliance capabilities. Of course. I'm hoping I'm not missing anybody here. Incoterm certification, ICC. Yeah. Stay connected. Keep in touch. I have just added a link to the news to our newsletter, just where we will send out updates on different sessions like this. So if you're not already on that list, join the list. And thank you so much, Bonnie. Thank you so much, Colm, and everybody for joining us this afternoon. I shall share the recording. And best of luck to everybody. Keep in touch, and we're all in this together.
Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thanks, Bonnie. Thanks, Colm.
Nice to meet you all.
Nice to meet you, Colin.